Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And before I start, I'd just like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas there. So, no problem. And so today we're going to talk, obviously, about the SDTC and some of the actions that happen. So, it can be a bit technical, but in essence, it's actually a fairly simple, horrendous, but fairly simple scandal. And so what it involves is the formation of an organization, a company, on the behest of the government, and actually has a very laudable objective. You see, Mr. Speaker, we're suffering through a productivity crisis in this country. Our productivity is amongst the lowest of advanced economies. We would rank at the bottom, certainly probably the G7, and one of the lower performers in the OECD. And so one of the keys in growing productivity sort of sounds like working hard and all those good things. That's not substantially what productivity, though, gets a lift by. You can work as hard as you want, but if you don't have the appropriate innovation and technology, you simply aren't going to get ahead as a company, or in this case, as a country. The example that is obviously an exaggeration, but does well to show the example, is if you're tasked with digging a hole, perhaps a foundation for a house or for a building, if in fact your only technology is a shovel, you are going to be there for a long, long time. And even if you have the best workers in the world, you're obviously not going to be able to compete with someone who has an excavator. And so, unfortunately, that is too often the case. Granted, that's exaggerated, but too often the case in Canada. Our machinery, our systems, our technology is often 5, 10, 15 years behind most of our competition. One of the most significant competitors, of course, is right across the border in the United States of America. Their equipment will often be 5 to 10 years on average younger than ours. And you can just imagine, if you've got an older car, as I do, it does not operate as efficiently or as effectively as a brand new car or a brand new refrigerator, if it's an older refrigerator. And because we are using older machinery and older equipment, we are falling further and further behind. And that brings me to the SDTC, which its laudable objective was to help cure this problem by stimulating the economy, by improving productivity, through investments by the government in investments in the economy, and in innovation particularly. The idea was, if we innovate, if we come up with some just absolutely amazing ideas that we can grow into machinery, we can increase productivity, and productivity, when it is increased, affects nearly all of us. A rising tide lifts all boats. And so the idea was, let's make some investments into these important innovations and technologies to help the Canadian economy and to help all Canadians. It's a laudable objective. And in fact, past governments have even participated and agreed with this. There's, of course, some debate whether a government can do this effectively or not. But in this case, we really did not get to see the opportunity whether it could be effective or not. This was because instead of making those investments into equipment, into technology, into innovation that would help our economy, unfortunately, liberal cronyism and corruption got the best of this organization. And so what happened is you had the government, with taxpayers' dollars, fund with $400 million. And really, this is a fiduciary duty, because what the government is doing is they are collecting this from Canadians from coast to coast, taking that $400 million and putting it into a pot, and giving these individuals, these members of the board of the SDTC, the responsibility of finding some of the best innovation to invest in so that you can lift the entire standard of living for Canadians from coast to coast. And so this is a tremendous responsibility that these people were given, a real fiduciary responsibility. You're given other people's money to invest on their behalf for the hopeful return of improving the standard of living for all. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth of what happened. You had $400 million, which was basically spent away in corruption and given away to liberal insiders instead of actually helping innovation. So there are a number of different facets, including over $50 million given to ineligible contracts. So that's just saying we've got what you're going to do is you're going to design a framework to give this $400 million away, and in that framework, you're hopefully going to capture and design it well enough where you're going to get those great companies, those great individuals that have those ideas that can help the productivity issue. There were $50 million, they did come up with that framework, and then they decided to take $50 million and not put it within that framework. So totally ineligible. But to me, the most troubling part of this, Mr. Speaker, is that of that $400 million, tens of millions of dollars that was given away in conflicts of interest. And conflicts of interest can sound a bit fancy. Well, what does that all mean? Well, let's go back to that pot of money that has been gathered from coast to coast through income tax, through sales tax, through the carbon tax. All of this money is being taken and put into this pot and given the responsibility to the SDTC to administrate and to award these monies out. What happened is you've got this $400 million, and then you've got this group of people who have to decide where that money is going. Unfortunately, tens of millions of dollars of that actually went to people who were supposed to objectively decide where that money went. And in some cases, here's how it would work. So there would be, of course, there would be an application, and then that application would come before these individuals that would be the arbiters of where that money goes. And so that money would be plunked down, and they would decide. And so what would happen would one board of directors or one of the members would say, hey, I've got a conflict of interest. So that's company A, okay? So they walk out of the room. But all the while knowing that they were actually going to hear from an individual who had ownership or who had an interest in company B that was coming up for application next in line. So here you are sitting here as company B now. You've got an interest in company B. You're looking at the grant from company A, knowing full well that in the next half an hour, they're going to decide whether you get the money or not. The idea that that wouldn't bias someone is just this side of absurd. And so hundreds of millions of dollars that are gone out the door. It's important to note, and this is the part that I think is really underreported and really not expressed enough. That money just doesn't come from the Prime Minister's trust fund. That money does not just emerge from the ether. That money is gathered. It is pulled from the hands of hard-working Canadians. It is taken from a single mom. In fact, a single mom earning $40,000 or $50,000 can face a marginal effective tax rate as high as 40, 50, even 60%. Mr. Speaker. With the clawbacks and with income tax, yes, that's absolutely what they pay. You can look it up at the Fraser Institute, or you can look at the CD Howe. They've written numerous papers on it. I trust the members to look at this, review it, because that's the reality of it. And so this money that is being taken from hardworking Canadians is then going and funneled in buckets full, Mr. Speaker, to Liberal insiders. And I want to give one example of where that $400 million could have been spent and where that $400 million could have done, in my estimation, a great deal of good. We've had, I have the privilege of being the Shadow Minister for Transportation, and we've had in the last couple of Transportation Committee meetings, we've been discussing and studying the Big Dock. Not many of you will know what the Big Dock is, and that's fine. The Big Dock is located in Fort Chipewyan, northern Alberta. There are 2 First Nations groups and also a Métis people that utilize the Big Dock, in addition to a rural municipality as well. This Big Dock is the center of activity. It is where children learn to swim. It's oftentimes where folks, first time a child might throw in their first line to catch that fish. That has excitement. I can remember my son actually catching his first fish, and it's such an exciting moment. And so you've got this is the center of community. It's also, by the way, the only way that during the winter, the only way during the summer that you can get in and out of the community is through this Big Dock or wharf that exists. And what we found out at Transport Committee is that this dock and the vicinity is contaminated. It's beyond doubt, and that Transport Canada knew about this at least since 1997. Most recently, a report came in 2017 that said that there were hydrocarbons, that there were arsenic, that there were other heavy metals, other contaminants that I certainly would not want to be having my children swim in or have anyone's children swim and play in. In fact, there are even older reports that perhaps show that there is radiation surrounding this dock. And Transport Canada knew about this. And in the 2017 report, of which they had an obligation underneath the environmental assessments to disclose, you know what they said? They said, well, we were looking at actually divesting this, and as part of a due diligence, we sent 2 out of the 3 Indigenous groups this in a package of due diligence. In a huge package. For those of you who have practiced law, you know what due diligence can look like. It's tens of thousands of documents at times. Tens of thousands of documents. And this government said, the Transport Canada said, that's good enough. We've disclosed it. They didn't disclose it. They kept it a secret. Since 2017, they knew it was contaminated. Worse is that they had to be dragged kicking and screaming. Because what actually happened, how we found out about it, is that the chiefs at the time realized that the dock was actually getting covered, or the water levels were declining because the sediment was building up around the dock. And so they needed to dredge it. And it wasn't just out of pure recreation. Like I said, it is the only way out of the community. And so when the wildfires struck the area, they had difficulty actually evacuating. And so they asked in 2023, and then again in 2024, we need to have this area dredged. Transport Canada was reluctant. They didn't know why, but they knew that if another wildfire hit, they may not be able to get out of their community. They might literally burn to death. And so they said, you know what, we're doing it, whether you want it or not. You know what the response back was from Transport Canada? You know what the Transport Canada's response was? You will be put in jail. If you go ahead and you dredge this, you will go to jail. So they're then left with the terrible position of A, let their people down by not dredging it, meaning the next wildfire could very well be the end of their people, or secondly, to go to jail. And so they actually did a brilliant, what I thought was a brilliant course of actions. They hired their own toxicologist. They wanted to find out what was going on there. And they found out a couple of things, Mr. Speaker. One, it's contaminated. Secondly, after the contamination was discovered, this government did not bother to study it for the effect on human health. This Liberal government chose, through Transport Canada, their agency, that we know it's contaminated. The next logical step from a professional toxicologist was to look, well, what's the effect of that contamination on human health? But instead of doing that and finding out, does this have an impact, what would be the impact, they decided, no, we're going to actually keep this as a commercial port, even though anyone who's been to Big Dock would be able to easily tell you this is much more than an area of a barge where we ship off supplies. This is a community hub. This is where children swim and fish. And they chose, we're just gonna turn a blind eye to this. And that's what they did. That's what they did. And it wasn't until that the Indigenous peoples chose to get their own toxicologists, they found out about this contamination. And here we are now, and still dragging, kicking, and streaming. And you know what they asked for? They asked for $25 million, which is a fair amount of money. And goodness sakes, for folks in my community, $25 million sounds like a lot of money. But when you look at that this government spent $400 million to achieve nothing but to pad the pockets of Liberal insiders, for less than 10% of that investment, you could have cleaned up, remediated the entire area around Big Dock. you could have built a brand new dock so that, one, you had an area where children could go swim and fish and enjoy again, an area where First Peoples, the Chippewa Nation, could evacuate effectively for less than 10% of what this government wasted padding the pockets of Liberal insiders. So, Mr. Speaker, I've been trying to talk to this in a way I hope that most folks can understand. That this isn't just $400, when you hear the number $400 million, like with the billions this government has spent, with a deficit of $40 billion, actually we don't know what the deficit is because this government won't even tell us what the actual deficit is. They are supposed to have their public accounts due by September at the very latest. We're now in December. We still don't know effectively what the deficit is. And we will hear criticism mostly from this side of the aisle and the folks who are the other side of the aisle and who support them, that sometimes we ask questions that are too aggressive or even seem petty. But I've heard the Leader of Opposition ask a completely substantial and reasonable question. What is a deficit? What is a deficit, Mr. Speaker? What type of government does not respond to that type of question? This is like 6 months after they're supposed to have published it. Do you know what would happen, Mr. Speaker, in a private business if a CEO refused to tell you what their earnings were and what their losses were, or what their revenue or what their costs were for this long a time? I can tell you exactly what would happen. They'd go to jail. They would go to jail. They would be fired and they would go to jail. Because there is a duty on all of us. This isn't our money. This is not my money that we are administrating. This is not my money that we're negotiating. This is not their money. This is not the Prime Minister's money. This is not the Liberal government money. This is the people of Victoria, of Vancouver, of Calgary, of Edmonton, of Winnipeg, of Toronto, of Orono, of Crammy, of Brighton. These are the dollars that they work day in and day out for. These are dollars that they were hoping to utilize for their children's education. For many of them, a children's education is even so far off, they just want to make sure that their kids can eat at the end of the week. And instead of that money going to where it can best be spent by the people who earned it, it's sent here to the ivory white towers, where these folks who tell you, we know better. We will make sure that you don't just spend your money on beer and popcorn. We will take that money here and we will invest it for the best of you because we know better than you. Well, we've clearly seen that they don't, and that money belongs in the hands of the hard-working people who earned it. It belongs in the hands of our Indigenous communities. It belongs in the hands of our farmers, of our business owners, the job creators, because they earned it, they value it, and they know where best to spend that money. And so the next time you hear about some story of this great Liberal program that's going to come out and revolutionize the world, I want you to think about something. I want you to think, you know what, that single mother who's putting water in her milk to make sure that that her child has enough just to get through the end of the week, is it worth taking another $20, $30 from her for this great imaginary program that will never do anything but build bureaucracy? Mr. Speaker, we need to return to being the freest country in the world. We need to return to a country where everyone has opportunity, where it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters how hard you work and what you want to accomplish and who you want to be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a privilege to rise.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député d'Alfred Pella.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it quite interesting hearing my colleague across making all these comments this morning. We both sit on the Standing Committee of Transport, and he did a great job in playing with the facts. You know, he says that we've turned a blind eye, but I'd like to remind him when the Conservative Party under Stephen Harper found out about this contamination, they completely not just turned a blind eye, they shut off their ears because they didn't want to know anything about it. And moreover, they were ready to sell it. Can you explain why there was inaction in those years, and why was the Conservative government trying to get rid of this problem and selling it off?
The honourable member from Peterborough, Northumberland South.
Mr. Speaker, there's an epidemic that's out on this side of the aisle. It's called whataboutism. They refuse to accept accountability or responsibility for anything. Quite frankly, I don't care if the contamination can be traced back to Johnny MacDonald. The fact is, over the last 9 years, this government knew about it and did nothing.
The honourable member from Alfred Pellat already had an opportunity to speak. If he wishes to get the floor again, he could also rise to be recognised by the chair.
The honourable member for Berthier-Mesquite-Angers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. It's an interesting measure that the Conservatives have put forward this morning. My question is as follows. Does he not think that it's incomplete? Couldn't we do more? The emergency here is trying to reduce an imbalance between supply and demand. For example, could the federal government continue to invest in social housing? Would that not be a good idea?
From Northumberland, Peterborough South.
This wasn't exactly what my speech was on, but I'm happy to answer the question. The reality is that we have a supply and demand issue. The government benches have one solution. That's about building bureaucracy. We have another solution that's about building taxes. According to experts, the leaders' plan, just the removal of the GST will create over 30,000 home builds. The more we build homes, the less houses cost, the more chances we have for folks to walk across that threshold and enjoy the dream of home ownership.
Questions and comments. The honourable member from Elmwood, Transcona.
Thank you. I attend the Transport Committee with the member from Northumberland, Petersburg South, during that meeting that he spoke about regarding the Big Dock. The Director for Contaminated Sites Division from the Government of Canada informed the committee that there is a list of 24,000 contaminated sites across this country, with only 238 being monitored by the government. Will the member, through you, Mr. Speaker, promise that if he becomes part of the government, that he will commit to cleaning up these sites and managing all new sites in a fast and effective way?
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that was actually, I serve, and I'm proud to serve with that member. That was actually a response to my question with respect to the contaminated sites. There's 24,000 of those. You know what? $400 million would not have gotten rid of those 24,000, would not have cleaned them up. But it sure of hell would have been a lot more effective than the $400 million that was spent to pad Liberals insiders.
Question et commentaire. The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. While Conservatives are focused on axing the tax, building the homes, fixing the budget and stopping the crime, Liberals are trying to distract with their temporary tax trick. And I know this member has an immense background in terms of supporting small businesses and understanding legal technicalities and supporting that impact businesses. And one of the things that we've been hearing about is the administrative and compliance costs associated with how the government is going to be kind of switching back and forth the rules around GST, that this is going to create an immense burden for small businesses. And rather than our proposal for cutting the tax, eliminating the carbon tax everywhere and for good, which is clear and simple, what the Liberals are doing imposes a major burden on small business. And I wonder if the member wants to share a little bit about that.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
How much time do I have, Mr. Speaker? How much time do we have left in questions? 5 minutes. Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to just spend a little bit of time here quickly and talk about the efficiency and how an economy works. So you can think of capitalism as the allocation of resources based on consumer demands. And so what consumers want, they will get through a system of purchases and otherwise. And the more efficient that is means the more those goods get out. And the more effectively and the wealthier everyone is. Every time the government puts in a regulation, and some of those are needed, by the way, don't take me the wrong way, but every time the government puts in a regulation, they make the system less efficient. that means that there will be more money going to Ottawa and less money going to Canadians. And particularly where you create temporary, short-term distortions, you can actually do a lot of permanent harm to the economy because you disrupt the efficiency of the economy. The buy and sell signals that exist in a capitalist economy are distorted. And so what actually happens, I would love for it to believe that this had a good intention, but I can almost guarantee you that the outcome will be negative for most Canadians.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Preston Chesapeake. Je m'excuse, j'ai oublié le
Chesapeake, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
My colleague, of course, for his speech this morning, and he's a hard-working MP, and I appreciate that. But I have to be honest with you. I'm surprised that the Conservative decided to talk about housing today, especially when they have clearly, the leader has clearly indicated that he intends to cut the Accelerator program as well as the housing infrastructure program. An Accelerator program that's going to build over 750,000 homes in the next decade. That's quite impressive when you see that. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think the Canadians can see what's happening. There's a trend. The Conservative are now voting against many of the great programs, the food school program, the child care program, the dental program, the pharmacare program. I think they know where the Conservatives are going to make their cuts. So my question is he one of the MPs that has the gag order or has been silenced speaking about all the good things the Accelerator program has brought and will bring to Canadians? Thank you.
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
You know, thank you very much, and I really appreciate that. I actually had the opportunity to ask the Minister of Housing how many houses. This is a question I put to him. I was in committee. The Minister of Housing was right there in front of me, and I asked Minister of Housing, how many houses will the Accelerator build? Do you know what he said? None. He said they will not build any houses. You can read the tape. In fact, you might have, if you've seen our commercials, you probably have seen it. The reality is it doesn't build any houses. It builds bureaucracy. Their own, as opposed to our housing plan, the removal of GST, their own housing expert says that it will build over 30,000 homes. 0 or 30,000? You decide.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Argenteuil, La Petite Nation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague, my friend as well, at the Transport Committee. I would like to also thank him for his 101 course on how to build the Canadian economy with SMEs. I appreciated when he said that selection criteria would be based on long-term decisions that shouldn't just be made for a 2-month period. My question, why did he vote, therefore, against permanent measures for childcare benefits, for breakfast for children, or for housing? These are all long-term decisions. Why did he vote against them?
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for...
Thank you very much. Conservatives have a very different view and vision. They want to build bureaucracy. We want to axe the tax. We want to fix the budget. We want to build the homes, and we want to stop the crime. So when we look forward to that, we believe that fundamentally, at least I believe fundamentally, that a dollar in the pocket of a Canadian goes a hell of a lot further than the dollar in the pocket of a bureaucrat.
An extraordinarily short question from the honourable member from Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I just want to thank my colleague for his speech, but I know he's talked about it before, specifically this program that we're debating today around SDTC, about how it actually functioned for about 20 years with no issues, and it's only in the last few years, due to some insider sort of appointments by this current Liberal government, that's created this problem. So I'd just like him to elaborate on the damage that the government's done to this program.
Equally short answer from the honourable member.
I will accommodate, Mr. Speaker. The corruption and rot of this government has destroyed many institutions, including the SDTC.